But first, late in the session, word the White House is still focused on a 15% corporate tax rate actually added fuel to the rally. The Wall Street Journal reporting today that President Trump has ordered White House aides to accelerate drafting a tax plan that would actually cut the corporate rate to as low as 15%, and that deficits are not a presidential priority. But will enough Republicans who, remember, railed against mounting debt for 8 years buy into so-called dynamic scoring? Here to discuss now, Boyd Matheson, Brian Brenberg, and Ford O'Connell. Boyd, let me start with you. Last week, of course, we saw Mnuchin, Mulvaney, Cohn, all on singing from the same hymn sheet. And essentially what they were trying to tell us is like, hey, forget about that CBO scoring and static scoring and forget about debt and deficits, because if we do this right, we'll generate an extra $2 trillion in the economy. So let's get the ball rolling. That's going to be good enough for the rest of the Republicans?
It's going to be a tough sell, I think, to a lot of the conservatives that are going to say, wait a minute, we got to make sure we're going to pay for this thing and not just add more to the deficit. They've been criticizing the Democrats on that side. I actually think the biggest part of this is selling it to the American people that this is not about corporate taxes, but the benefits that it gives to hardworking Americans, to the poor and the middle class, that will benefit from lower prices for goods and service, that also can invest in companies and get a better return for their savings and for their retirement. And so it's the messaging strategy that they've got to make sure they get this right. They've got to have a messaging strategy that's as robust as the tax policy strategy that they're trying to put forward.
So, Ford, how do they pull that off? Because we know that it's going to be called trickle-down economics. It's going to be called a failure. It's going to be called, to Boyd's point, all about rich people getting richer at the expense of the little guy.
Well, look, Donald Trump ran as the jobs president, and the only way to kickstart this economy is tax reform on both the corporate and the individual front. And understand something else. The Democrats are not interested in tax reform and putting people back to work. They're interested in winning the House in 2018 and neutering Donald Trump so that he's a 2-year president, not a 1-term president. To Boyd's point, the best way to do this is you're going to have to pass this via budget reconciliation. What that means is Republicans only in 51 votes. What I would do is make sure that you take care of low-end earners on the individual side, and you close the state and local loophole on the individual side, because that way you can't say that this is only for millionaires and billionaires, but this is for hardworking average Americans.
So, Ford, you believe they can be done simultaneously, corporate and individual taxes?
Yes, it has to be done simultaneously because small businesses and S-corps and pass-throughs really rely on the individual tax code. So you got to do both corporate and individual, and you got to make it one big package, and you got to push this through as a jobs bill that's going to help put money back in Americans' pockets.
You know, Brian, I get that part. In fact, I felt like 15% for small businesses via the individual tax code. I think it can go as high as 25% for corporations, because your effective tax rate will still be under 20%, and you don't have to do all these other gimmicks like border adjustment tax. Now, I should also add that Stephen Mnuchin is talking about $1 trillion coming back via repatriation. So put it all together, how does it work out?
Well, I don't think it's going to be revenue neutral, number one, and I'm actually glad the president is being honest about this. On the campaign trail, remember, he was saying we're going to have big tax cuts and we're going to start paying down debt, and nobody believed it. And he's saying now, look, I understand when we cut taxes, it's going to increase deficits. I'm okay with that because I want to grow the economy. That is so helpful, Charles, because now members in Congress can say, look, this doesn't have to be revenue neutral. We know it's probably going to have to sunset after 10 years. That's okay. Let's cut taxes and get the economy growing. We can throw out the border adjustment tax. There's clarity here, and that's for the first time really in this debate since he's been elected.
Boyd, listen, I'm a supply sider myself, and of course, so I think we might all agree that it doesn't have to be revenue neutral, but there's a big difference between being revenue neutral and assuming $2 trillion over 10 years.
Well, that's exactly right. I do agree with Brian. In a perfect world, it does not have to be revenue neutral. But now we are in the swamp known as Washington, D.C., and it almost has to be revenue neutral because the Democrats are in no way, shape, and form going to give Donald Trump a big legislative achievement that he can carry into the midterms and win re-election in 2020. This is all about politics and scoring political points, and Donald Trump is trying to do the right thing by the American people.
Yeah, but Boyd, I don't know that Donald Trump is concerned about Democrats giving him a big legislative victory as much as Republicans. And again, it gets back to the idea that, hey, even if you say St. Ronald Reagan, supply-side economics, it worked to spark the economy, we lived happily ever after for a long time, people may see $2 trillion as a bridge too far.
Yeah, $2 trillion is a very big number. You can do real damage with that, and so I do think it's going to also require the administration to make sure they're communicating and connecting with the members of Congress as well. Things like the BAT tech that you talked about is dead on arrival in the Senate, and so it is going to require a little cajoling and a lot of selling that, look, this is good for the American people. This is good for the little guy, and if the Republicans are ever going to become the party of the little guy.
Give me an example, buddy. How do you do that? Give me an anecdote or something. How do you sell that? You're later on after the show, you're at a bar or somewhere, and someone next to you says, "I don't buy this." And he says, "Let me show you how it's going to benefit you, Phil."
Well, we have a tough alcohol policy here in Utah.
Okay, over short root beer.
Okay, cold root beer. There we go.
I know you guys are probably knocking out the sarsaparilla left and right.
So this is how I would talk about it. One, you have to look at what that does for the average American person. So one, say, look, this is going to impact what you are paying at the pump. It's going to affect what you're paying at the grocery store because you're going to have a reduction in cost of goods and services. And a reminder, look, this is good for the poor and for hardworking Americans. And then you've also got to talk about those middle-class Americans who are trying to do the right thing, who are trying to save for a rainy day and get ready for retirement and say, look, you're investing in companies in your 401k. This is good for that. And then finally, it's, look, if these companies have resources, they're going to grow jobs, and that's going to be good for you. It's going to be good for your neighbors. It's going to be good for the country.
Brian, from an economics point of view, could it be biting off too much, though? I mean, is it too ambitious? Because, you know, there's been talk that perhaps from an economic and political point of view, smaller bites that are achievable and actually build on each other for some form of momentum.
Well, you know, this actually is a smaller bite than what he was talking about. Again, if you go back to the campaign and look at what he was talking about, he was saying fundamental tax reform. That's not going to happen here. You know, Ford brought up the point earlier about how do you get this done in the swamp. The way you get it done is the way George Bush got it done. It's going to sunset after 10 years. Trump's going to have to sell this as a temporary tax cut, and he's going to say, once you see the results, once you see the growth, we're going to go back and make this permanent. But right now, he's taking a smaller bite.
But let me say this, if you can actually get Democratic buy-in on the corporate side, okay, then you can actually generate long-term growth and make it permanent. The key is to have the long-term investment so that it's permanent. But we know that the Democrats are never going to go along with that. So therefore, if it's going to sunset after 10 years, it's got to be a little bit more aggressive.
Well, more aggressive than 15% corporate tax rate?
Well, maybe you go to 20% corporate tax and then you close a lot more loopholes on the individual side. So you're going to have to, if you're going to go higher on the 20% on the corporate, you're going to have to look to close the loopholes on the individual side because, Charles, we know what the formula for economic expansion is. Close loopholes, lower rates. Basically, get rid of the inefficiencies, increase the incentives.